welcome to The Natural View. I'm Maggie, Jaqua, and we are here live at SupplySide West. We're here at the TSI Group booth with Shawn. Hello. So we're going to find out more about the company here today, and we're going to dive into the topic of healthy acid aging, which is such a growing topic. So excited to learn more. And I want to start just talking about, we've really seen this shift. So we used to focus on anti-aging.
Right.
We don't do that anymore,
No.
right? Like it's
No.
not
It's
about
okay to age.
stopping.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. So can you kind of talk to us about that shift and what you're seeing?
Right. So I think the biggest thing is we're seeing this kind of push towards quality of life with the longevity term. So when we talk about, aging or aging more gracefully, it really comes down to the quality of life and that those aspects that we look at that are relative to, say, our perception. So I use that term because one of the biggest complaints as we age is a loss of energy, right? But how do we define that? What's that perception? Most of the time, it's things that are measurable, like strength, that joint mobility, or just mobility in general. So we're seeing that kind of shift from I want to be younger to people really don't want to be younger. What they want is more quality of life in a healthier body. So that's where we're seeing most of that movement.
Yeah. I know muscle loss plays a role in that in terms of being linked to how energetic you feel later in life. Can you give us a sense of how big of an issue that is in terms of, when do you start losing muscle as you age? And I think it's pretty early. Can you dive into that a little bit?
It's way too early because I'm way past that number. So basically at about the age of 35, we start to see this kind of slow detrimental loss. And it's the old term, it's kind of a brutal term, but it's a great way of visualizing it. It's death by 1,000 cuts, right? So it's not like one day we just wake up and say, oh, I lost my muscle. There is typically a kind of that epiphany that does happen, like something's changed. Like I said before, a lot of times we hear the number one complaint that a physician hears from their patients is, I feel like I've lost energy with age.
Yeah.
Now, there can be a whole host of reasons, but a lot of them, when you ask that follow-up question, what does that loss of energy feel like? They'll say, it's harder to play with the grandkids. Going up a flight of stairs isn't as easy. Carrying groceries in from the car is more challenging. That's not energy, that's strength. So when we see that loss in strength, that's where we really have to start asking ourselves, what can we do to improve quality of life? And that goes back to the first part of the question is, really muscle health is so important because at the age of 35, we start losing about 10 to 15% per decade. So if you think of that is a very slow, gradual loss. And by the time we get into our 50s and 60s, as I am in my 50s, there has to be something we can do as an intervention. And we'll all point to exercise. That's great. But we all know compliance isn't the greatest. So we have to find ways to turn that machinery back on to maintain that muscle.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, and we know it's great. We're seeing, people are being much more proactive, which is fabulous. And something that we're seeing here for people who aren't at the show, we're hearing GLP-1 a lot. We know all there are doing this to stay healthier, but there's some downsides too in terms of the strength like you're talking about. Can you kind of talk us through some of that?
Sure. So the GLP-1 RA story is an interesting story. Obviously, there's this momentum that it's not going to change. Now, the issue is, and we don't want to get into the nitty-gritty about every little aspect of it, but the one we're going to talk about is muscle health because, I think that's the one that we all are really seeing as the surprise with these GLP-1 RA users and what's happening to their muscle mass. So I've seen it as low as 39%, as high as 60% muscle loss during that initial 6 to even 12-week period. Now, after that 12 weeks, we don't all of a sudden see it really shift to fat loss. There's still a percentage that's still muscle loss. So you start asking yourself, what is the consequence of losing this metabolic engine of muscle mass when the goal should be fat loss? But when we're talking about weight loss, we have to keep in mind some of that weight loss that's occurring, and in many cases, a very significant portion, is muscle. So what are those consequences is kind of the next thing we're starting to ask ourselves. And we're seeing it so much in the industry where we've known for a long time that proper diet, nutritional kind of counseling, nutritional intervention, and in supplements can help in this, in terms of having a healthy weight management. But now that there's this big pharmaceutical footprint here that's impacting the way not just the consumer or in some cases patient, but also how our industry reacts. We can sit on the sideline or we can get engaged.
Yeah. Well, and the media has caught on to GLP-1s and some of the effects.
For sure.
So, and I think a lot of that has to do with just the drastic weight loss numbers people will experience. But talk to us a little bit about any sort of weight loss journey. If you're thinking about intermittent fasting, or if you're on a very calorie restrictive diet, do you still see the same muscle loss issue?
Yeah, we see it in everything from gastric bypass patients to people doing time-restricted feeding to simply calorie restriction. If you're not being proactive on the nutritional side as well as the exercise side to maintain muscle, anytime we lose weight, if we don't put an extra emphasis on ways and methods to maintain the muscle, we risk losing muscle mass with the desired fat loss. So going back to that, anytime you think of any situation where a person's making a conscious decision to manipulate their body weight, I say it in that way because we all know there are disease and conditions that unfortunately are outside the consumer's control or patient's control. But in this case, when we're talking about a healthy individual that's looking to make a body composition change, so many times we lose muscle mass when our target desire is to lose fat mass. We get so wrapped up in the scale, we forget that there's another aspect to this is what's the composition of that scale weight look like?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So the bad news is either through aging or these intentions that are good to get in a healthier body weight, we have these muscle loss issues. But the good news is that you guys offer some support. Yeah. So tell us about that.
So the support we're offering is myHMB. HMB is a downstream metabolite, amino acid glucine. And what makes it so special is that it actually has a dual mechanism. And that mechanism is to increase protein synthesis while concurrently reducing protein breakdown. So the mechanism that causes that muscle loss with extreme, calorie restriction, diet control, or even with aging, we can actually, the intervention of using HMB, we can actually turn that machinery back on so we keep the protein synthesis elevated while concurrently reducing the breakdown. And what's really interesting is there's a whole other mechanism in play here, is that HMB also is a signaling molecule for increasing lipolysis in fat cells while also increasing beta oxidation in muscle cells. In other words, we preserve the muscle and we free up the fat stores to be used as an energy substrate in the muscle cells. So that becomes that protective mechanism as well as energy kind of repartitioning, if you will. So that's how we're able to maintain the body composition. So tying that into products, we see so many people targeting, as they should, micronutrients, protein, making sure these individuals are getting proper nutrition first and foremost. Then adding HMB into the product portfolio so that they have the ability to turn that machinery on and kind of turn off the machinery that's causing that catabolism of loss of muscle.
Yeah. So you touched on science a bit.
Yeah.
Let's go just a little bit deeper. You just had a study published a little while back in Nutrients, correct? And it talked about myHMB and vitamin D. Can you give us some of the details on that?
So we've actually had a couple different studies that we've looked at that combination. So one, in an aging population, we're looking at maintaining muscle mass with HMB and vitamin D, as well as muscle function and strength. And that was in an older adult demographic. Since we brought them up, I wanted to touch on that study. So that study showed that HMB and vitamin D is synergistic. The combination is better than the two ingredients alone on improving muscle mass and function and strength. And again, that goes back to that turning that machinery on. And then in another study, we looked at time-restricted feeding and maintaining muscle mass while we are in essence, calorie restriction or calorie control. But what was really remarkable about that study is we actually saw changes in IMAT, or intermuscular adipose tissue. And why that matters is that goes back to when I talked about that fat, kind of that repartitioning or changes in body composition. The intermuscular adipose tissue, we got three different kind of categories loosely of how our fat is stored. We have the subcutaneous, which we can palpate. You grab the back of your arm or your waist and you can feel those fat stores. That's subcutaneous. We have visceral, which is around the organs, and kind of think of it as, originally kind of we always thought it was that protective effect. But it also, unfortunately, has a lot of metabolic consequences when you get high amounts of visceral fat. And then the third one we really look at, and we see it a lot in the aging side, is that as we age and as we become metabolically kind of resistant, we start seeing this increase in this, lack of a better term, the marbling of the muscle in our body. And that's that intermuscular adipose tissue. And it's kind of a chicken egg story, because as you get more of that, you build up more insulin resistance. But is it which one's the consequence of the other? It's interesting when you take HMB, you see a reduction in IMAT, which goes right back to that mechanisms I talked about, where we're increasing the protein synthesis. We're also increasing that utilization of fat stores right there at the muscle. So that's probably contributing. And this study was done in middle-aged women. And we had felt like we had a void in our research. We had studied older adults. We had studied young. And between those two, I didn't mean to point at you for older adult and you young, but it just worked out being that way.
Okay.
But sorry, this next question is going to be a zinger, but you keep going.
But really, if you look at kind of those demographics, we had an overlooked population because we know that we should be more proactive in that middle-aged category that I live in. You know, I'm in my 50s. I want to be proactive to maintain the muscle mass now, so I'm not looking at that epiphany moment in 20 years where I go, wow, I have no energy, I have no strength. It's incredibly important. So that's why these two studies, I think, are kind of very different in design and outcome, but so important telling that complete picture. Because a study's just a scene in a movie. The whole entire movie is the combination of studies.
Yeah, I love that analogy. So much
from somebody I know.
Excellent. Cheers now.
So you talked about, obviously people should be living the full healthy lifestyle. We want to be doing things right, exercise ideally. But for people who aren't exercising, can they also get some of these benefits?
Yes. So that's the great part about HMB is in the older adult study I talked about, that actually was in an exercise and non-exercise group. We saw improvements in HMB and vitamin D group. That was improvements in muscle function, muscle strength, and strength without exercise. Now, the reason why I want to point that out is that so many people, obviously they have the ability to do it and they choose not to, but more importantly, there are a group of people out there that maybe not have access, they don't have the ability, and that little bit of a switch to help maintain some muscle and prevent some of that loss or even potentially restore some of the lost muscle can even help get them as a catalyst or kind of a push into doing more exercise. But we can't deny the fact that, as we know in our industry and as we know from an exercise science standpoint, compliance to an exercise program in the older adult demographic is very, very low. And if we simply tell them, as whether it be a healthcare provider or somebody in our field says, well, just work out, you don't have to worry about that. That's a pretty weak recommendation relative to what we already know compliance looks like. So taking that proactive approach for both exercise and nutrition is great. I'm not trying to say this is a replacement, but here's something that can actually provide benefit to people that just won't do it. And you can actually make an effect on that muscle mass by improving the synthesis and reducing breakdown.
That's great. I mean, and not only is compliance critical when you're doing like an exercise program, it's really hard to stick to.
Exactly.
So is, if we're being honest, so is taking supplements. Exactly. And so I'm wondering, you have a new technology called FZZR, correct?
Great way to bring that up.
Yeah, of course. Let's talk about it a little bit, especially when it comes to GLP-1s. And, maybe explain what it is exactly and how this could help consumers.
Sure. So just backing up a little bit about GLP-1, a lot of the data we're getting, even some of the anecdotal, is the consumer that is using a GLP-1 RA, they typically have this change in appetite, the gastric mobility, all these things that kind of impact that feeling of not just hunger, but the ability to ingest foods and liquids. A heavy milkshake can be a challenge for some individuals. So having something that's on the lighter side, yes, there's the pills, the tablets, but if you want a heavier load, in other words, you want to deliver more actins to the consumer, clearly that needs a lot more micronutrients. They need some fiber. They need, again, HMB, and even potentially some other actives that can contribute to the benefits of what they're missing from the foods they're not consuming now. FZZR is a very interesting technology in the fact that it's effervescent beadlets. So effervescents have been around, these large tablets, think of the Alka-Seltzer days. But the problem with that is they're very, believe it or not, they have a very small surface area. Even though it's a big wafer, the surface area is relatively small. So it requires a great deal of the effervescent actives. So with the FZZR, what makes it so great is you carry a very heavy payload because it's typically these beadlets, but you can add more beadlets, deliver a much larger payload. But the effervescence, because there's so much surface area on all these little beadlets, you only need about 15% of the what we call the effervescent technology in it.
Okay.
So it's a very novel delivery for so many people that are just sensitive to, the fizziness, the carbonation. It just makes it more palatable for a lot of products, a lot of ingredients.
Yeah. Excellent.
For the brands out there learning about the FZZR technology, what are some of the other opportunities there that they can think about in their formula?
Sure. So really what's nice about it is, I don't want to say it's endless, but since they're individual, let's say you had 2 ingredients that didn't play well together, you could put one in one set of beadlets, another ingredient on another set of beadlets, and then you can blend them in the stick pot, and you're able to deliver something that may previously didn't play well with an effervescent tablet, or didn't play well in a powder matrix or a capsule matrix.
Yeah.
So that gives them a lot of versatility. So there really isn't a limitation. I think the fun part about this too is it's not just exclusive to Oregon water. Some individuals really like to simply just put it in. Well, not like the pop rocks, but kind of that fuss.
Yeah,
I know everybody does. That's why
I'm about to open this thing up. I'm going to open this right now.
So you can do it by mouth. You basically just direct to mouth, or you can do it in a drink. Now, obviously, if you're doing like a hydration format, you need the water with it. So, there's reasons why you want to mix them. But what makes it nice is that if an individual, again, GLP-1 user, they're using a couple of those, beadlets, just put in their mouth to get that little bit of a sensation. It's experiential. And even the drink is experiential. So, yes, for this consumer, it's great. And then it's great for a whole host of other applications, because we all get tired. And I take capsules and tablets every day. I take powders every day. But every once in a while, having something like this in a format, it makes it a little more engaging, a little more, it's an experience.
Yeah. And to your point, just people are different. Some people like, capsules, and however you can help them. If it is a different experience and it's that one thing that helps people plug in, or somebody plug into that and be consistent with it, then it's beautiful.
Consistency is key when it comes to supplementation.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hey, we've talked to you a lot about a lot of different things. Is there anything you want to leave us with as far as final thoughts, or something you want to talk to?
I think it goes back to how we started. The biggest thing I see right now in our industry and the opportunity that exists, because again, that's why we're all here interacting, right, at SupplySide West. But if you really think about what our industry could do, again, I don't think we should be on the sidelines on this GLP-1 RA user, experiencing muscle loss and the whole other host of things that I think can have nutritional solutions.
Yeah.
I truly believe our industry shouldn't be sitting on the sidelines. We should be front and center. We should be helping, assisting, rather than saying, no, that's not the right path. It's here. We have to recognize it and don't fight against it, and just provide solutions, whether it be delivery formats like FZZR, it be formulations like what we have offered. We got 2 different formulations we're offering right now. One is kind of like is kind of set up so it's a support. Another one is obviously for the muscle health support and maintaining muscle mass while they're trying to, I like to say the term, lose fat mass. Because if we say weight loss, we're going right back to what we just said through our work. Well, I think all in all, it's just our industry really has to be in the front and center. So we're getting the moments in front of the media. We're getting the moments with the clinics and these brands that are really pushing, the online sources. I think if we can be partners with them and say, you have a consumer that'll keep using this as long as it's safe and healthy, we can be their source of that safety and efficacy and health that they're looking for.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I love that. Like, find the need and just help. We're all about spreading wellness. So
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Well, excellent. Thank you.
Thank you guys
for joining us, and follow along to the TSI for all the latest, and we'll stay tuned for what's next on the horizon.
Thank you so much.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.